Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you, talking all about the Monday Night War episode from, honestly, last week. I watched this last week when I was sick on my day off from work. I spent a majority of the day in bed due to bad weather and just being under the weather myself. But this title of this episode was called Building an Army. This is later on in the series. If the rumor is right, this is probably like the 15th, maybe 16th episode of a 20-episode run. So these are coming to an end. I went on to watch the newest episode, which is called The Click, which I was really excited about. But then I realized that I hadn't finished this episode that I'm talking about this week. So I wanted to go back and check it out. I rewound it a little bit from the place that my Apple TV said I left up on. And I realized that when I was watching this last week, I was in a little bit of a downer mood about this. I just wasn't really connecting with the episode, but I thought the way that this episode polished up at the end was a very, very good episode. It mainly dealt on building an army, which is basically what they called the mid-card of the show. I thought this was kind of a rerun episode a little bit because it talked a lot about people were watching WCW because of the cruiserweight division, and they had already done a whole episode on cruiserweights, and they sort of talked a lot about the NWO and them sort of clogging up the main event and mid card of any pay-per-view scene, where basically these guys down near the bottom weren't getting any television time. If they were getting television time, it was just basically just go out there and wrestle a match, even though they weren't really connecting with the fans, and there was no way for the fans really to get behind them. They talk a lot about how basically Vince McMahon was able to sort of replenish his roster. The way that he sort of kept everything fresh back in the day was he had his main eventers. Everybody knew that Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man, so on and so forth, those were the top dogs of the WWF. But then he always had that tag team division, and from there came Bret the Hitman Hart, came Shawn Michaels, through some lucky transactions. Razor Ramon came in, Diesel was there, but sort of they were able to replenish that main event scene, which they were really living off of. WCW coming in and buying up all those older stars sort of made it where WWF at the time didn't have an undercard as well. Everybody can remember the times that you sort of point out, your Duke the Dunkster Drosy, your Trash Man, your Doinks, Bastion Boogers, Mantar, I can't remember that fucking weirdo that main evented the first Monday Night Raw against The Undertaker. There was a lot of these goofy gimmicks that just weren't really connecting with the fans. You flip over the channel to WCW, you got, of course, then you got, Scott Hall, you got Kevin Nash, you've got Hulk Hogan as the NWO. They're all wrestling under their, real names. There's no gimmicks behind them. They're just coming in. They sort of have a gimmick of people thinking that they're there to take over WCW. It's one of those moments when you're watching wrestling and you're able to break that wall down where you're like, I know what everybody tells me is that wrestling is fake, but that's not fake. What I'm seeing right there, that's real. I mean, how do you hit somebody with a baseball bat and it be fake? They sort of show how WCW took over the Monday Night Wars, how they were running wrestling at the time. Basically everybody was hip to wrestling, but they were all watching on WCW. A few were WWF lifers, and they stuck with the product no matter what they were doing. And even though it was the lowly days over there, I guess people just really liked Shawn, or they really liked Sid, Bret the Hitman Hart. There were guys there that on the main event scene that really did deserve the spots they were in. But they sort of say that the day that WCW sort of was exposed for what it was the day that Thunder came about. When you're listening to a lot of shoot interviews, or you're listening to wrestling podcasts, Eric Bischoff has been a guest on these, and he says the biggest mistake that he made while running WCW was not turning down to Thunder. It was something that he knew was a bad idea. He was going to have to bring new people in order to, to write an extra show. He was going to be able to talk the wrestlers in to wrestling an extra show. Ted Turner and the heads of TBS and TNT thought it was a great idea because, it was such a big rating success and a ratings boom for TNT to bring this show on that didn't really fit what else they were doing over there. But, they were trying to spread some love over to TBS to where they can get some of these big ratings as well. When Thunder debuted, it was a lot like, when Superstars or Main Event or, how WWF, or WWE now, starts up these shows. Is basically you put a whole bunch of tension on them for a few weeks, and the second that the ratings start to fall back, you just pull all hope from that show. WCW, the way that they had their contract set up is that they, promised guys they were only going to work a certain amount of days, and for those certain amount of days, they were going to get a certain amount of pay. WCW, basically had to tell these guys that they weren't going to be used on Thunder because you don't want to use these guys up too fast, because now instead of, having enough days to cover a whole year of pay-per-view, TV, and then some sporadic house shows, now you're basically using up these guys' contracts in half the amount of time as you normally would if you're, bringing them to your Wednesday night. They probably were Tuesday night tapings, as they did back in the day. This sort of made it where, people were watching WCW Thunder. They were seeing how watered down the product was, and they had Kevin Nash talking about how it was well known as this was the B show. You didn't want to be featured on it. You were doing everything you could to get pulled from it, whether if it was lying about an injury or just telling people that you weren't going to do it. And then you got Booker T, a hot up-and-comer at that time, whether if he was in the tag team with Harlem Heat or if he was a singles wrestler, he was the guy that held the TV championship a few times. I think I remember him having the U.S. championship as well, but I think that was later on down the line. But, he was just looking for any opportunity he could get to get onto television. And Booker T says that was some of the best exposure he ever got. There were people out there that did watch Thunder. He was the guy that, would do whatever WCW told him to do. When they did send him out there, he did get a lot of wins, or at least wrestled in good matches that people would remember. And he knew that, somewhere down the line that was going to pay off for him. Once Vince Russo came into power of WCW, he sort of knew that people were sick and tired of seeing those top main eventers, whether it was Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Sting, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger. Basically, these guys have been paired off in about every different direction and done every single match that you could think of. They needed fresh meat at the top of the pay-per-view, which basically led to a big-time, clash between Bischoff, Russo, and Hulk Hogan, between, who were the top dogs going to be, which came down to the Bash at the Beach 2000 situation, with Vince Russo and Hulk Hogan having the shoot. You can debate if it's planned or if it was not, with Hogan and Bischoff walking out of the company, which did lead to a lawsuit that Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff did win for discrimination, Vince Russo. But basically, Vince Russo said that Hogan could keep the championship. That was his last appearance in WCW. And he brought out Jeff Jarrett and Booker T to wrestle a match, which Booker T won, becoming his first WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and sort of being that fresh guy. WCW didn't last long after that, but, it was sort of Booker T, Jeff Jarrett, and Scott Steiner running WCW until, its dying days in 2001, when TBS and TNT basically said there would be no longer wrestling on those channels, and they still have yet to bring back wrestling, no matter how big of a ratings thing it brought in. It just wasn't worth what they were having to pay out to do it, so they just sort of killed it all off completely. WWF on the other side, they were building an army, trying to, build up the mid-card, and people were jealous of what was going on there. Chris Jericho talks about, it didn't matter if you were Stone Cold Steve Austin or if you were Val Venus. The tag team division, everybody had a storyline. Everybody had a basis on what they were trying to do. Everybody knew where they were going, and guys like Crash Holly, guys like Bob Holly, guys like Albert, It didn't matter that you weren't going to be main eventing the next year's WrestleMania. You knew that on Raw or on SmackDown, you were going to have a storyline, and as long as you walked up there and you knocked that out of the park, basically, you were going to get another storyline after that. They just kept building the mid-cards. Out of the middle of nowhere, they started talking about the tag team division, which I was really hoping was going to get its own Monday Night War special, but they talked a lot about, the WrestleMania three-way ladder match between the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian. Of course, won by Edge and Christian, but these guys really got an opportunity to step up to the plate and steal the show, much like Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. People paid for the show to see Hogan versus Andre, but the next day all the headlines were talking about Savage versus Steamboat, and you can debate how great you think that match is, but I think that's one of the top 10 matches I've ever seen in my life. Doesn't matter how many times you watch it, you're going to get soaked into it, and it's really going to be something that you really want to see again and again. It's just one of the best styles of wrestling you could do. Of course, Vince took over the ratings and it killed off WCW. They became their own. One of the biggest acquisitions before the end of WCW was Paul White, the Giant, the Big Show as known today, coming over, and people can debate if Vince used him the way that he said he was going to. There was lots of talk on the Observer Radio about Big Show because of the match that he had with Eric Rowan at TLC. Alvarez and Dave were talking about these conversations that they would have with Vince back in the day, where Vince would be talking about the Giant in WCW, about how Eric Bischoff in WCW had no idea how to use this guy. He was counting down the days till this guy became a free agent because Vince knew that he was going to sign him and he was going to try and book him and use him like Andre. And, I think it was just a few weeks into his run, Vince had Stone Cold Steve Austin beat him. And I don't know if that was supposed to humble him or if that was supposed to, back off some of the heat that maybe the Giant was getting a lot. You can think of what Jericho and Triple H talked about on the Jericho podcast with Triple H talking about the heat that he had, and Triple H saying that basically the guys in WWF looked at the guys that came over from WCW as they were, basically, jumping off of the Titanic and using the WWF as a flotation device. Basically, they're working their ass off to have a better product and win this war for Vince. And now, Vince is signing these guys from the opposition and just bringing him in and acting like, just give him these spots, and it's a lot like the Invasion storyline where you could see the guys that always ran out during the Invasion to run down there, the WCW guys were like the Acolytes, the Hollies, these lonely bottom of the barrel WWE guys, and I'm sure that they really had those feelings at that time where it was like, what's going to happen to us? We just, worked our ass off for 3 years to beat these guys into the ground. Now their company's closed, and they're all going to be walking over here looking for jobs. Whose job do you think they're going to be giving them? They're going to be giving them ours. And it wasn't worth it, and it was probably one of the best decisions Vince ever made, was basically at the end of the Invasion storyline was to split off into another brand, having Raw, having SmackDown, being able to keep a lot of these guys under contract and move towards a brighter future. I still think that the brand split could be very good today. Maybe having John Cena be the main guy of one brand, maybe have Roman Reigns be the main guy of brand number 2, and sort of keep these guys separate. Have guys, sporadically jump from show to show, and it just keeps fresher matchups as we go along. I know that when they killed off SmackDown, having their own brand was because Randy Orton and his crew weren't really able to support house shows. People didn't want to go out and see SmackDown. They wanted to be able to sell the brand. Instead of, saying Raw house show or SmackDown house show, they wanted to say WWE house show, and they would announce a few names, and people would buy tickets based on that. But I don't know. I think as they build matches towards WrestleMania, build matches towards other pay-per-views, keeping guys separate would be a lot better. But building an army, WWE Network, go check it out. I thought it was a good episode. I was able to go 15 minutes talking about it when I didn't even think it was that good. But now that I'm done with the review, I think it was better than I thought it was 5 minutes ago. So peace out, everybody. Enjoy your day. I'm gonna watch The Click now. Peace out.